I'm Mark Goodwin. I'm I guess, a multidisciplinary artist based in the Bay Area who is Bitcoin only and, really interested generally in just like, yeah, educating people and getting, as much of this information about this really brilliantly amazing thing that's going to change so many facets of everyone's life in every way, basically. I just love talking about it and educating people. So over the last few years, I've been in Bitcoin, very seriously the last like 5 years, and definitely much more so the last couple years. And at this point, yeah, I spend my time, basically just trying to talk to as many loved ones as possible and make sure they're, they've bought their ticket to the arc for what's coming. It's been it gets easier and easier every day to convince people that Bitcoin makes sense, because now they can see it in every really tangible ways. Yeah, I do a lot of things in terms of the day to day. I don't have like a full-time thing. I'm sort of splintered out in a bunch of different ways, but I went to school for jazz drums in Boston, and then went back to school about a decade later for electrical engineering, because I wanted to build fuzz pedals and fix amps and all that stuff, and ended up learning a ton about sort of the fundamentals of electricity, obviously, in studying it formally in school. And that was right about the same time I got really into, seriously into investing into Bitcoin, at the end of 2017, when I got really serious, was right when I went back to school. So it was really good timing, and kind of got to learn a little bit of the nitty gritty. And it's so applicable to everything. I mean, if you really think, in electrical terms and loads and sound circuits and good flows, you can really apply it to everything. And I think from an economic standpoint, you can really apply those fundamentals to the world economy, especially when you're talking about Bitcoin, which is, directly playing into the market in a very tangible way. This sort of, digital energy side, what Bitcoin's really going after, super electrical. So that just sort of blew my mind even more. And, as I'm sure you don't stop learning about Bitcoin. It never stops teaching you stuff. So yeah, go for it.
On that note, what approach might you have to Bitcoin that me knowing very little about electricity, or like the fundamentals of electricity, like what might you know that a normal person wouldn't?
Well, I think just actually directly into how it applies to market. The reason why, proof of work is the one, and why it, the longest chain and all that, why it matters so much is because of the electrical debt that was incurred by the miner to write these transactions into a block. That debt is like the most important part of imbuing value into the system. So it's not just a keystroke. It's not just a centralized POS system. And I mean that in every sense. There's a literal cost, and there's a risk being put up by the miners in a very real universal sense. You're taking on an electrical debt that you are then putting into the system, and you're transmuting that analog, that analog electrical debt into a digitized, credit that then you can let appreciate on the blockchain over time, and then spend that debt in the form of credit later for ledger space. So there's a really like fundamental difference between a proof of work chain, and especially, the only proof of work chain that matters, Bitcoin, versus these centralized systems, these, pre-mined systems. There's no energy cost to, join the system. Sure, there's technical costs, and you got to, now to run a node on some of these insane systems, that you have to have such amount of storage and bandwidth because they're just inflating out of control. Small blockers for the win again. When yeah, I think people really misunderstand that. It isn't worthless. Like it is backed by something, and there was a capital, risk put up in, I'm gonna pay $95 of electricity to make $100 of Bitcoin. That's a really like tangible thing. It's not, I'm gonna put in $100 of my money and buy into this token system and hope that it appreciates. There's a much bigger thing going on in the permissionless energy market. And there's a lot of people talking about it now, which is really cool. There's senators now that get it, there's representatives that get it. It's pretty wild to see. I was just in Texas and hearing Ted Cruz talk about using Bitcoin to, attack the duck curve of renewable energy and to capture stranded natural gas. It's just like, people are really, really getting this. Okay, you're incurring a debt to get a credit on the system. Every market is a debt and credit at the end of the day. And Bitcoin is the only one that digitizes it in any way that's like one-to-one. And so that's really important. It's an exceptionally huge advancement in, energy standards, which is what we've used for, really, you can't have a monetary system that's not an energy standard, because it's really representing human energy and human capital, right? Even if you're making a good, it's the time it takes to make the good. And so Bitcoin is a really big deal. And I know you know that, and most people watching this sure know that. But I think from a really fundamental sense, from a one-to-one sense, Bitcoin just, it is different. It's and so thankful for my electrical, I'm still definitely a student of it, but I was really lucky to sort of be able to see that in a very tangible way, like working with circuits, seeing how, logic trees work. And, there's so many things into what a Bitcoin miner is and how that works. And I felt really lucky to be able to get that education in the Bay at the time of the start of, sort of mass Bitcoinization. I'm not going to say hyper Bitcoinization yet, but certainly in the Bay, mass of sorts, so.
It seems that you understood quicker than most, or at least quicker than I did, that mining is far from sheer profit. It's actually like macro scale, like a very narrow margin. And which is important to understand. Like, this is why, and this is actually how probably I first really understood that solar energy isn't viable. It's not a viable, sustainable solution to much of anything. Also, how I kind of learned that Tesla is somewhat of a business that operates maybe differently than it's advertised, to say the least.
Let's just pull that back for a second, and I don't want to talk about Tesla too much, but just the concept of energy credits and carbon credits, as if you could pay fiat for something that would somehow tangibly offset what's going on. It's just really insincere to the equation of energy that's happening. You're expending no energy to do that, to pay for a carbon credit to offset. And so they kind of created this business model where they sell these sort of virtue signal feel good tokens, which never made any sense to me. And I've definitely, I have some strong background. I guess I'm pretty liberal generally, but I'm a former, I don't really associate with that, sort of politically, but in terms of environmental stuff, I've followed that space for a long time. And you're totally right. There's so much. First off, renewable energy just is just a misnomer. Goes against one of the, the first laws of thermodynamics. It's not renewable. I might push back a little bit on the solar. I think solar, I am a huge Price of Tomorrow fan. That's one of my books that I buy for, my girlfriend, my dad, anyone in between. And I love the way that he talks about solar in that book, that it's like, the sun puts out a year's worth of energy in about 2 hours. We can't, a year's worth of human energy spent on the globe in 2 hours. We just don't have a way to catch it or store it or whatever.
Right.
It's true. but we can attack some of the problems. The animal that Bitcoin is going after now is not the bear anymore. It's the duck. It's the duck curve of the energy grid. And what that basically means is, during the day when people aren't at home and they're all, in office buildings, we have really low energy. The sun's shining, you're getting, some wind, some sun, whatever. There's very low demand. And then everybody comes home, and around, 5 to 8 o'clock, everyone turns on their lights. And then you have to turn on all of this coal to ramp it up to be able to meet the demand of the grid. If you just attached a bunch of miners and you created this sort of like duck curve pendulum, and you have a ton of solar and a ton of, panels up that are no longer losing you money by being, inoperable, creating energy for the grid that isn't being used. They're now incredibly profitable, and they're making really, really cheap energy. And now you can use that energy to mine Bitcoin. As soon as the demand of the grid goes up, people start going home. You can turn off those miners in 30 seconds and send that energy back to the grid and meet that demand. So that duck curve that we're trying to fight right now is really the fight now. And so I do think that Bitcoin has a huge role to play. And I do think solar does too. But yeah, I mean, we need nuclear. I mean, pretending, sort of LARPing as an environmentalist, not accepting that we're going to need, energy. Energy is a necessity for, not even just industrialized society, but just society. People need it. We need it. So this idea of, we're going to be 100%, well, it's insincere.
And I think that the angle I should clarify I meant is that solar is not a viable means of mining Bitcoin or powering things reliably.
Yeah.
I should clarify there.
No, yeah, 100%. And it is that unreliability of that system that currently makes it basically useless for us. But Bitcoin can take that unreliability and use sort of the game theory of proof of work, again, of this energy debt incurred to get credit on the over time. That famous, infinity divided by 21 million is like that's for real. A truly permissionless, like you can take energy from anywhere, independent, is a humongous deal. And then be able to go to the free market in a global sense. We haven't had global energy markets. There's energy exports that exist. It's one of the few markets that I follow, oil, aluminum, metals. And, aluminum has been like kind of the biggest energy export because the main cost of fabricating aluminum is how much energy it costs. So if a country has a lot of aluminum, or rather a lot of stranded energy, typically they're going to turn that, transmute it into aluminum. But now we have a whole other market. We have a free market that's a global energy remittance market that any citizen can tap into. It's no longer just, nation states or the, utilities that were king-maked and knighted by these, nation state controls. And now, I can participate in the global remittance market for energy as a schmuck from Boston that lives in the Bay Area. It's pretty amazing. That's a really profound technological advancement. And now I can protect my human capital by investing in that market and knowing that it's going to be, it's not going to be manipulated by spoofing or, of course there's, the beauty of Bitcoin is that it is an open market, which is where we see the most insane things all the time. And it's incredible. And, I've legitimately had really hilarious and fun experiences looking at the charts of Bitcoin and seeing, the human psychology of the market playing out. I mean, sometimes it's hilarious. But knowing that I can, access that market and really have this cryptographically secure store of value. I mean, I know everyone knows it, but it's a stupendously big deal. And it's fun to sort of be, we missed out on a lot of stuff being, around in our age group, more or less. So it's fun to be able to surf this this wave with like-minded folks. So I'm really thankful to to feel honestly secure in this time of just absolute insanity. And don't get me wrong, of course, fluctuations can, make you feel certain ways here or there, but I really truly feel pretty secure in my medium and long term, which how many people, in our generation can really say that right now. It's such a time
Yeah.
of uncertainty to actually be able to know that you're securing your energy like that feels pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to be certain about anything in the future. I would say Bitcoin alleviates future uncertainty, which
Oh,
is a little bit different. But
100%, I agree.
yeah, I agree with you, especially if your, final asset is going to be Bitcoin. Like, there aren't very many scenarios in my mind where I have to give away my Bitcoin or like sell it, like this is everything, like that is my store of energy for good.
Totally.
So to your mind, what makes you confident in that? Like, is there not some marketplace of competing stores for energy, or has Bitcoin won for our lifetimes, and why?
I mean, I think we're, again, as I said, I think the animal that we're hunting now is not the bear anymore. I really do feel pretty confident. Um, I mean, historically, um, that there's a great Luke Gromen quote. He's a great macro guy, and he talks about how the most underappreciated asset in Wall Street is history books. And I have to agree. I mean, there's what we're going through is not actually that unprecedented. We have seen it before. We've seen it many times. We can pull up charts and literally look, and we can see the fractals, and not to get into TA, but literally historical, rhymes and harmonies. And I really do think we're in sort of a mathematical equilibrium of where we are kind of like it's not going to be a straight line up, but I do kind of think that the marketplace has spoken. And again, yes, I don't think there's any such thing as 100% certainty, and I think that would be foolish to think, but it's about as close as it can get to being a mathematical outcome. I do think it is sort of a binary. I think part of the Nakamoto consensus being longest chain, most hash rate, is when you tie that to the understanding that it's a fundamental incurring of debt by miners, on a fundamental level. They're spending electricity to get ledger space. To extrapolate that over time, there's very little game theory that I could see where someone would want to break that. I mean, even looking at trying to break a wallet or something, which, how much energy it would take to, expend that many, computations to try to figure out. I mean, it's almost thermodynamically impossible, right? And so, we might get into some political discussions if we have cryptographic issues later. Say someone does, in a linear sense, figures out a way to brute force something, cryptography is exponential. So cryptography is going to be able to, take a snapshot of the chain, boom, move over, and we're on to, more digits, and your linear brute force is, you're wasting all of this energy trying to be a bad actor in the space, rather than you could just put that into the space positively and gain incredibly from it. So they're really, even the worst case kind of doomsday scenarios of like Satoshi's coins move, or someone breaks, figures out a brute force and somehow gets lucky and breaks a wallet. There's a bounty now for that wallet. Everyone can see it. Everyone can see if they, if the cryptographic proof got compromised. Again, unbelievably impossible stuff, but not unbelievably unlikely stuff, but not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
But we can recover from those. Satoshi has comments about that where he talks about, there's politics and cryptography that we may have to deal with, but this may give us at least a few years, And I think Satoshi
Yeah.
is an incredibly humble entity. But I agree. It's hard to think, when we really truly blow this out, how Bitcoin would work with latency between planets and stuff. But you have to really go that far before I really see any sort of issues. And even then, I think you know, the digital scarcity is an incredibly rare thing. I don't think it will be found again. It certainly won't be distributed in a way that's fair. I mean, all of the miracles that had to happen for us to be in the scenario that we're in now, yeah, I don't see it going away. I don't think that the infrastructure that's been invested is going to be turned off. I don't think the people that have, you know, held through all of this insanity are just going to suddenly be like, you know what, I could really use, you know, $100,000. It's like, no, I'm holding that. You know, I saw a great thing the other day. It's like, I'm not buying from my first name, you know, I'm buying from my last name. I think people are really being multi-generational here. They're seeing, you know, further. And that's how I feel. I mean, I'm certainly, I don't even want to think about touching even half of what I've been so lucky to be able to stack, you know. I mean, that stuff is for future generation stuff. Not that I have any plans or I'm there yet, but I really, truly, you know, we're heading into a deflationary world via math. And I'm really confident because I'm a math person. I was raised by two CPAs. I'm adopted. I'm very different in many ways, but I was you know, I had a fake checkbook when I was like in sixth grade, and was like working on compounding interest. And they had me all thinking about all this stuff. I was really lucky to have financial literacy at a young age, which is something that it's just ridiculous they don't teach in public schools. Because I mean, obviously, I think if they did, you know, retail would be realizing the things they're realizing now, maybe 10 years ago.
Well,
So
the strange thing is when they do teach it, they teach it wrong.
it's
They're I just mean like this. There's no way they're teaching it right. We have so many people in power that are either refusing to see or just like mal-incentivized enough to like actually hide what is really going on, which is that they're stealing from you. They're
yeah,
stealing your time and energy every day of the week through
yeah,
taxation, through inflation.
yeah. I was talking to a client. So again, my parents are CPAs and they have a firm, and I was talking to someone about Bitcoin, and was telling him, you know, kind of what I thought and whatever. And he was like, man, you know so much about this. It's amazing that you didn't go to business school. And my ex was like, I think that's probably why I know stuff about this. Actually, it's probably because I didn't go to business school. Not to, you know, poo poo on business schools. There's tons of stuff I don't know about economics, and I'm certainly not trying
Yeah.
to, I'm an expert on it. But yeah, I think to look outside the sort of, you know, look behind the curtain, or you know, look up, to see maybe
Yeah.
to the to the narrative is sometimes takes a contrarian outlook, I think. But they'll all know at some point, you know. But also, so to give you one more anecdotal thing on that, again, my dad was a partner at one of the big four accounting firms before he started his own practice, and I gave him a copy of Nick Bhatia's Layered Money, and he read it, and he sent me this really nice, sweet email when he finished it. And he was just like, unbelievable book, loved it. I had no idea how many layers of trust were involved in our financial system. And I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
first off, amazing that you saw that. And I'm so thankful for that book, for, you know, being able to break through for the visual learners, you know. But also it's like, I mean, I mean, you were an accountant for one of the top firms of, I mean, it's really funny when you actually look at like the US payment system. It's like, oh wait, we just have this random black hole entity in the middle of it that's the lender and buyer of last resort at the same time. It's like, how did we get here? And it's not, they're not elected officials, they're appointed officials by elected. The whole thing is just so wild that we got here. But even people so entrenched in the, you know, the cathedral of mainstream financial economics and the financial world, you know, partners at big fours have no idea, because I think they really are purposely, you know, sort of, you know, pay no attention over there. You know, let's get back to talking about interest rates and yields, and not, you know, actually thinking about, well, why do we even need that? Why are we fighting against inflation? And that's why we get a yield in our savings account. Like, what if we flipped it the other way and instead have a deflationary or a disinflationary monetary policy, where instead of every purchase you make, or rather, anytime you work for someone, any paycheck you get becoming less and less valuable over time. Instead, it's the opposite, and we have this distributed system where every payment you receive is worth more and more to you every day. You know, Bitcoin goes up like on average like 100% a year or something.
Yeah, more than that lately.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, again, from a historical standpoint, you know, you look at sort of, you know, everyone likes to say Weimar Germany, but you look at the Reichsmark. I mean, it didn't just stop going up once hyperinflation happened. You know, I mean, it went insane. We went like straight up. So we have these like, these you know, multi-trillion, you know, 51 trillion% change from 1919 to 1923. Like,
Yeah, I think there's a crazy like it's a weird comparison to make, like Weimar Germany, not you right now, but and like Venezuela, like people like to say that we're entering a hyperinflationary environment, and we're certainly in an inflationary environment, but hyperinflation is not, you know, 100 million Bitcoiners deciding not to use the US dollar anymore. You know, it's not choosing one currency over another. The government has to print for that to occur.
Totally.
Yeah.
But that's sort of a bit what I wrote. So I, you know, just did my first article, first of many, I hope, for
Yeah.
magazine about it's called The Birth of the Bitcoin Dollar. And it sort of took a look at the historical precedents of, you know, kind of how we got here and, you know, energy systems tied to financial systems. But one of the main things that sort of the conclusion of it was that like we are kind of on the brink of another bailout. And this idea that we're going to, I mean, we may have averted some crisis, kick the can down the road for a couple months with this default business. But I mean, we need to print. I mean, we owe almost $30 trillion. And if we print money, then if we raise the interest rates, our debt service on that basically $30 trillion of debt is going to be more than the inflows of our GDP as a country. I mean, we're a zombie company. If we were a company listed on an exchange, you would take us up back and, you know, all the other us. So that there is, honestly, I think that first off, hyperinflation does have definitions, and the dollar did hyperinflate into Bitcoin at the turn of the year by like WEF definitions of a percentage change in a month. So we did have a couple months where we actually were hyperinflating.
What's the percentage on that?
It's high.
Or if you had to guess,
over a month. I think it was something. It was like 40% to 80% or something like that.
Just because of the stimulus all at once.
Yeah, I mean, we've printed, you know, 60% of the U.S. dollar supply in the last like 20 months or something like that, and
it's crazy.
We're not out of it. I mean, there are so many people, you know, 4.3 million jobs open. People aren't going back to work because the wages aren't high enough. We're seeing, you know, breakdowns in workforce stuff, and for tons of reasons. And I think the idea that we're out of the woods and that, like, you know, tapering is going to happen, and the Fed sort of, you know, they put a couple dot plots in 2023 that we may raise interest rates a little bit. I think there's just no way. I mean, it would be suicide if we did. We would default in another way overnight if we raise interest rates. So I really do think our only option out of this is to preserve the purchasing power of the net dollar economy, but inflate away the purchasing power of the individual. And that's why of the individual dollar. So we're going to see some wild stuff. We'll probably see some debt jubilees, and kind of it will be packaged as sort of this, you know, austerity, or maybe this like, you know, civil service, or, okay, here, let's get rid of the debt, the school debt, education debt, you know, maybe see some healthcare stuff, maybe. I don't know. But I think we will kind of see ways to hide monetary inflation, because the money supply is always inflating. It's where we can hide it, where we can deflate. So that's why we've done what we've done. This is what my article was about in the Middle East, and with the petrodollar is actually putting it into a ever demanded store of value, forcing people to use US dollars to buy oil. And then that oil is, it basically, it takes the inflation that's happening in the United States and takes it out of our system and officially increases the demand, right?
Right. And the war, like a lot of this conflict is caused not due to, terrorism or what have you. It's due to people choosing to export things in currencies other than the dollar, because we need to maintain those kind of like tentacles of centralized institutions that go into other countries. Like once these organizations are built, like you said, it's a zombie corporation. They can never be dismantled. We have to continue to print to stave off their entropy. Otherwise, all these poor government workers will lose their very important jobs at, XYZ corporation.
Well, there is some, I definitely, obviously, I consider myself working class, and I'm super proud of that. And who are the biggest debt holders of the US dollar? And, a humongous portion of it is the working class in these pension bonds and these pension funds. And those are the people that if, like Social Security, I ended up having an issue with my Social Security a few years ago with there was a number misprint on one of my W-2s or something. And so I worked at this job for a couple of years, and wasn't actually collecting Social Security. It was literally just an error, but I wasn't paying into it because of a typo. And so someone, advisor or whatever, was like, hey, you got to fix this. You're not going to get, your Social Security payments if you don't change this typo on your W-2. And I just laughed. And I was like, there's no way I'm getting any of that. It doesn't matter if it's a typo or not. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, it is a Ponzi. I mean, you can't store capital like that when you're also inflating away. It's just not possible. So we have these huge, debt holders in these, worker funds. And I don't know if anyone else noticed, but what were the first things that Yellen cut when came time for emergency procedures to not avoid a debt default? It was the USPS pension and a worker healthcare fund. It was the only, arguably the only things the government probably should be paying for. I don't know. There's a lot of nuance there, but it's hilarious that I guess if there was basic financial literacy, there would have been a revolution that day. But the revolution's happening regardless. It's just happening in a decentralized digital way. But no, I think we're going to see some really wild stuff, because I do think we need to print. And once we do, it may not be in $1 trillion coin or whatever this insanity is, but whatever we decide to do, it's going to have profound effects. And right now, the truth is, honestly, is that I think the purchasing power of the dollar is basically already done on an individual level. It's just, we haven't really caught up to it yet. So money is still a communications tool. It's a social construct. So we're seeing massive inflation in certain areas, but then, you can still buy a can of Coke for $1.25 or whatever. So there are still places where it can relax, but I think
the cost of education, meanwhile.
Yeah, no, really. I mean, you look at the sort of, not the consumer price index, but the quintillionaire price index. You look at housing, you look at healthcare, you look at baby care, daycare. You look at Medicare, education, retail, real estate assets, all the stuff that matters. And now we're seeing it in food. Now we're seeing it in gas, and we're gonna obviously see it in commodities and asset prices. None of which I think will possibly be able to. There's a very unique thing with Bitcoin, in that its supply is inflating at a rate that has absolutely no effect on how much demand there is. So, of course, we might see gold go up and real estate go up, but when those things happen, everybody that has a bunch of gold is, now is going to sell it, or they can send 3 more people down to the mines because gold has tripled in value, or, now they're going to sell their house because it's doubled in value. So there's more houses on the market. So that natural, fulcrum of supply and demand is going to keep those markets in check. Bitcoin is the only asset in the history of assets that's ever existed where its supply is completely couldn't give a hoot less about how much demand there is. TikTok next block 6.25, supply issuance. We're down below 2%. I think it's at we're inflating at 1.79% against total supply now. And that's why this halvening was very different than the other halvenings. And it was the one that, I saw the markets break as everyone else did, I'm sure, in March 2020. Everything went down. Oil went negative, the thing we invade people for, and literally, kill for. All of a sudden, we're paying people to take it away. Now, again, I know futures markets, they don't exactly work that tangibly, but I mean, that's a huge deal. And that day, it really did feel like an inertia system broke in our financial system. And I think if you were paying attention and you knew, you were buying up as much of that, $3,200 Bitcoin as you possibly could. I mean, it was scary, but I was never so sure of it at that time. And I, went all, pushed in for very tangible reasons. The halvening that happened in May after that was the first time that the inflation rate against the total supply was below the average inflation of the dollar and below the average inflation of gold coming out of the ground, both around 2% a year. So once we dip below 2%, we're at 1.79% and lowering every day, right? We're almost at 90% of total Bitcoin supplied. There's a bunch lost. We're going to see less and less. It's disinflationary till about 2140, and then we're just deflationary. And then if you lose it, you lose it. And then we're into this fee structure for, of how Bitcoin, stays afloat. So
the crazy thing about that, oh, sorry.
No. Just saying that math of the 1.79% versus 2%, where do I get my confidence? It's like, to quote Greg Foss or whatever, it's math, it's the numbers don't lie. They really don't. Jamie Dimon, the algorithms don't lie either. Do your basic diligence. Look at this stuff. Where is this bond market going? It's worthless. It's going to go into this vacuum, this deep black hole that is Bitcoin. It's going to suck it all up and not care. Sorry, what were you saying? I didn't mean to interrupt there.
Yeah, no. I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that's fundamentally broken is a non-fixed or a non-terminally scarce asset as a medium of exchange and a store of value, gold or the dollar. They break down over time, right? It's not that they are alternatives to one another. Bitcoin is an entirely different asset class and system, and it's actually a solution to these problems. I think the fact that the money can be printed and is not capped terminally, there will be no end to the dollar, is really the infinity of that equation. But it also makes so much of what we do in a day unworkable. And we're at a point technologically where our innovations, I think, could be further if we actually knew how much money we had. For example, if I go just to check my bank account today, I'm going to get equations. If I go to check how much Bitcoin I have, I'm going to get a number. By that, I mean, your final settlement in fiat never really occurs because it's always being taken away from you.
So true. I mean, I love the idea of when you look at $100 bill or a $20 bill, stop thinking of it as a tangible number. It's not. It's a representative of the market share of the purchasing power of the dollar. There should be a denominator under that $20 numerator, which is the total supply, which we know, fiat has no bottom. And therefore, you could speculate that the thing that's going to eat up this, humongous debt bubble is going to be Bitcoin, which it, ironically, because of its cap supply, has no top. So yeah, that's where I get, sort of the people do ask me, what would you sell Bitcoin for? Or what have you sold it for? And And I do think that there's like two very real and solid answers to that. And one is, yeah, there is no top. I mean, any bullish prediction that has a number is probably bearish. Like you can't really cap this thing. We have no idea where this is going. We don't know if, we're basing it on this unit of account of the dollar. We have no idea what the hell is going to happen. The Reichsmark to ounce of gold in 1927 was like $87 trillion per ounce of gold. So I'm not saying we're going to see $87 trillion Bitcoin per Bitcoin. But I'm saying that, it's going to be a broken unit of account in regards to how we express it in dollars. And then so there's nothing to sell it into in terms of an economic speculative vehicle. You might find short-term gains here or there in something, but in terms of long-term, there's nothing to sell into. I mean, there's just nothing. As far, again, humbly as a student of it, strong opinions weakly held, but I'm not selling it for any other economic vehicle. Absolutely not. But then the reality is, though, Bitcoin should be thought of as a means to an end. And I think that shouldn't be controversial. Like, no, I don't think you should sell 90% of your stack to buy a cooler car than the one you already have. That's not what I mean. But, you want to put money down on a property. You want to get a farm. You want to start a school. You want to start a business. You want to build a studio or invest in yourself or have a child and take 5 years off or whatever it is that you want to do. There are things that are worth more than money. And so Bitcoin is a means to the end to accomplish those things. But in terms of money, there's nothing worth more than Bitcoin. And, again, I intend to hold at least half of what I have to never touch in my lifetime and give it to the future. I'm really sort of just, I think of myself as sort of holding on to this stuff for the working class, for future generations. And, I've given away a ton in educational stuff. And there's no better feeling than knowing your loved ones and your friends who, when the markets broke in 2020, I bought a bunch of hardware wallets and I gave them to all my friends. And I went like, I don't know if you're not going to get this yet. I'm happy to tell you, hold your hand through the whole thing, but something very serious just happened. And I want you to be set up because you've worked too hard and you've saved too much. I don't want to see you get hurt by they're criminals. And I don't want to see you get hurt by that. So
you gotta have those open dimes ready to roll this Christmas.
Absolutely. So yeah, it really is. It's personal for me. I was, in the food and beverage industry and saw, the way the shutdowns messed everything up and how people were on and off from unemployment and, it's open, it's not, it's closed. And there were so many people that are such incredible people in my life that literally were like, Instagramming stuff like, guess I'm eating ramen tonight. And it's like, you are like a world-class, well-educated, unbelievably smart person who's so good in their field. But it's hospitality and you're getting screwed. And now you have no income and you just got off this, it was just such a mess. And so, I took it really personally and I still do. Any education or anything that I do is really like, I try to do it as a form of sort of, pushing back against what's right or pushing back against what's wrong for what's right. It's a shame that there isn't as much education as there should be in public situations, but, have the knowledge, it's sort of on you to give it to your community. And again, I definitely consider myself a student and not an expert, but I have been completely obsessed with this shit for many years now. And I've read a lot of books and done a lot of stuff. And I have an intermediate fundamental knowledge of it. And it's important to secure the future. And, before we transition into the deflationary world, it's the fact that you can still buy a Satoshi for, 1,000 Satoshis for $1 that's not going to be soon. Like that's going to be gone. And, we're you always think you're late, but it's just, we're so early, until you can't buy Bitcoin with you can't buy a Satoshi for $1. I'm going to keep buying personally. And it's not necessarily like for me, it's just to have more because I know that, I'll be able to fund someone that I love or fund a project
Yeah.
that is important. And so that's, my business partner, Christopher Federa, and I started the Art Bank, which is an artist focused Bitcoin only sort of community based on education first. And that's what we've spent the last, year or so doing, is kind of set up a catch-all for education. I've probably done about 50 like 101s or so with artists, with parents, with I did a VP of a Fortune 500 company, gave him his first Bitcoin. It was super fun. He's hooked. Trying to get him to put it on the treasury. We'll see. We're working on it, but it's so important to I hate the defeativeness of like, there was like a CNN article that was like the before times, and it's like, I hate this defeat.
Yeah.
It's just, no, like, humans are amazing. Humans are awesome. They're always doing cool stuff. There's always cool art being made. There's always cool code being written. If you don't know about it, it's probably because you're not connected to it, and that's fine. Go find those people, create infrastructures to support cool art, support good people. Because maybe this is a little extreme, but it's sort of warfare. I mean, it's informational warfare, and educational, financial literacy is one of the best fundamental ways to, equip your loved ones in the working class to sort of stay afloat. And, I'm a very, very nonviolent person, but there are ways you can win a war without, lifting a fist. And you can do that by explaining to people how credit and debt work and how money printing is horrible. And here we are, and inflation is recognized by retail. So
yeah, and I think Bitcoin is like also just like a war on stasis. I mean, there's so much about I've had a lot of jobs, a lot of working class jobs, like indoors, out of doors, grocery store. And it's just like the overall sentiment at these places where if you're not getting above like a 4% raise, you're getting a pay cut every year. And that's the case most of the time. The sentiment was just like, hang in there. You know what I mean? Like, just hang in there. See you tomorrow, I hope. And that, but when you begin to actually like accumulate digital property, digital energy and value, like it's almost a religious transformation, like in terms of your outlook on life that happened. It's why we seem so crazy. I don't know about you, but to our family members, is because it's like, no, you don't understand. I own something now. Like my work is I'm willing to work way harder because I like have a reason to.
I mean, I have hope. I have security.
Yeah.
I have a place that I can store my life essence, and know that it won't be diluted or coin shaved by someone that I've never met and shouldn't have any impact on my life. Someone I didn't vote for, someone I don't, so yeah, no, I agree. The time frame reference, I think, is talked a lot about, when you really are saving in Bitcoin, not really investing, but saving in Bitcoin, how you change your frame of time. But another anecdote for me personally, I don't drink anymore. I'm 3 years dry, and
Me too, man. Congrats. That's awesome.
Yeah. And one of the biggest things, I don't think it is any coincidence that I got, and I'm not 100% sober. I sometimes smoke here or there and whatever, but I haven't drank in over 3 years, and definitely cut some other things out of my life that I used to do while drinking. And I don't think it's a mistake that I found that new purpose and that new, ability to, to not want to escape all the time when I found Bitcoin. Or at least when I got obsessed with Bitcoin, they kind of happened right at the same time. When I changed my unit of account to Bitcoin was basically exactly when I, really took control of my, sobriety and just realized that I should become a better person. And instead of spending my money on drinking or whatever, Instead of running to the bathroom to do something stupid, I would run to the bathroom and during my shift and buy a dip because I saw Bitcoin went below $7,000 or something. It's like
Oh, that's so funny.
I remember literally once getting my tips from work and having a break, and there was like some fire sale, some below 10% day, and I ran to the ATM on my break and threw my money in and bought, and that's like, sure, yes. Are there tendencies of that are, attuned to sort of the addict mentality? Absolutely, of course. But
yeah,
what are the effects of it? We like to reject our biology all the time and pretend that we're not biological creatures, but like, no, how do you gamify it? I don't think it's ridiculous that there are so many of us in the Bitcoin space that have overcome drug and substance abuse stuff and in hand in hand with their Bitcoining.
The fiat lifestyle is a very limbic lifestyle. You spend much of your dollar trying to satisfy your immediate needs, where I think in Bitcoin you're solving for those down the road,
Totally.
quite some way.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like I just traveled. I went to the Texas Blockchain Summit. It was absolutely incredible. I went last minute and I bought like the cheapest tickets possible and the cheapest hotel possible. And like, sure as hell, my flight got canceled because I didn't have a crew. And then I had to buy another flight. And then there was like a cockroach in my room. It's like, but I'm like, you know what? I wasn't going to sell those Satoshis and ball out on the plane. I didn't care. I'm looking at, this is a much bigger thing. I want to give that 0.01 to, my niece or something, so, and again, it's not like, I don't think, do I want to have a wonderful, cushy life? Like, maybe not cushy is not the right word, but like a wonderful, full, saturated life. That's awesome. Yeah, totally. But am I changing the way that I spend money? Does money come in my wallet and immediately leave like it did when I was a cash bartender making, 300 something dollars a night and it, working 5.5 days a week? It's like that. Everyone always says, learn the value of the dollar. And I think we all did. We just learned that it's not fun. And so, we're having a big workers sort of identity crisis. Like, we're seeing the weirdest things ever in our job reports.
I think, well, I think like when you've become kind of like complacent or just like happy in unhappiness, I mean, this like breeds, addiction and all these sort of like anxiety issues that we're having as a society, not even just as individuals. And I think getting back a low time preference as a group and decentralizing and just sort of deconstructing the monetary system could go a long ways to clarify people's goals, their short term, near term and long term goals.
I think that's beautifully said, and I think that's something that really upsets me with the way that the prototypical left sort of approaches Bitcoin, where it's like, no, what do you really want? Like, you don't really want the Green New Deal to pass. Like, that's not what you want. What you really want is infrastructure being invested in these things. You want jobs. You want lower timeframes. You want to see more sustainable practices or less polluting practices. You want to see financial acceptance and unbanked people that don't have access to banking accounts being able to have access to the same financial tools that everyone has. You want equity in these senses. Well, how do you achieve that? It's like, this is actually a method that you could achieve all of the goals that you want. You want to fix the planet, go to a deflationary economic system. You will not be able to fix the problems of the planet with an inflating monetary supply. Absolutely impossible. It's a joke to think that you can. And but sure as hell,
everyone's dying on the wrong hill.
Exactly. And it's very strange to me. And I love the Human Rights Foundation and Alex Gladstein. And there's so many people doing amazing work and re-educating. But yeah, it is really sad to see, so many people that I, used to look up to and now definitely don't, or just people in my social group that I do appreciate and do love. and seeing these, literally, spewing propaganda about a complete misunderstanding of, it's not shadowy super coders. Like, I mean, sure, maybe a little bit, but what it really is like an open network of that's the fairest distribution of any token, as a representation of human value that has ever existed and probably will ever exist. People like to poo-poo on the Satoshi having 4% or something or whatever. It's just like, that doesn't even matter. That's nothing. Compare that to fiat. Compare that to gold. Compare that to anything else. Even if, he signs back in to, reality tomorrow and market sells everything. Yeah, that would be horrendous for like a little bit. But 4%, it's like, yeah, we would handle it.
We would absorb that.
We would absorb it. We're too robust. I mean, I think the narrative would be more shocking than the actual supply shock. Like, the narrative would scare people more.
Yeah. What do you?
Oh, he's back. Oh no, or whatever. More so than the actual supply and demand mechanics. I think people would try to buy him under the table and happily buy, a humongous amount of Bitcoin, non KYC. I think that they would love to do that. So
yeah, and those Bitcoin would surely go for a markup in the interesting way that Bitcoin is both fungible and not, right?
Totally.
So about that, I am comforted in the fact that like Satoshi, I think, was a net positive, like had our best interest in mind, not coming back. I like to think, and this is just anecdotal, I like to think that the stash is there to trigger and warn us against quantum attacks. They're all a legacy address. They're the easiest and most like best payoff to like get at those if you could break the encryption. But what do you think? I don't know.
I think looking at it in any other way is sort of naive. Like, I agree 100%. And that makes me stoked to hear you say that, because it's true. I mean, Satoshi himself, well, there were certainly writings in the very beginning that talked about the token economics of Bitcoin, referring to it as 20 million instead of 21, sort of assuming that a bit was, and if you look at sort of the receipts of the distribution of the network, it's like the Satoshi's hash rate was basically fundamentally exactly what it needed just to trigger positive difficulty adjustments, and no more than that. And as soon as the network was decentralized enough to no longer need his hash rate, and I'm saying he, just continuing the narrative that it's this single person, but he turned his miner off, and then the network went off, and had its first halvening and whatever. So I think looking at those wallets as anything other than a bug bounty, I don't think there's really much to be super afraid of. I think it would be the triggering thing. It's like, I know my whatever, certainly not 100,000 Bitcoins in a wallet. I know my, humble stack is thermodynamically safe, because no one is gonna care to try to steal mine and brute force, do a linear cryptographic brute force. I mean, the cost would just be so insane. A, you'd be better off just market buying, but then B, you could invest in the system, buy miners. There's so many other ways you could imbue that energy into the system. Looking at the way quantum works, you need to cool the bit so low, basically to absolute zero, to be able to, activate a quantum bit. That amount of energy that you would need, you should just use it to mine Bitcoin. You'd have a predominant share of the hash rate if you did it, or maybe not.
Yeah, or make like a super conductive transportation system or something, like literally anything else.
Anything else, right? So yeah, I agree. There's so many just wrinkles of the game theory of Bitcoin that maybe not all of them were necessarily understood when they were released, and maybe we grew into realizing them. And I think there were people that, even myself, when I first started investing, I didn't really think about it on this fundamental level of like, oh, wow, wait, it's the free market of universal energy. This is a big deal. I was like, oh, wow, limited supply. This is cool. Ooh, decentralization. Oh, cool. Not like fundamental universe energy equation shifting technology. So I think that there's a great possibility that a lot of the stuff that we sort of assume and like we think of as like standards of Bitcoin or within the Bitcoin protocol were like maybe realized afterwards. And I think that's definitely one of them. That, yeah, I think the bug bounty of Satoshi's wallet is it's worth more as a bug bounty than it is as anything else. And even still, someone does do it somehow, which is ridiculous. They would have every incentive to continue the soundness of the monetary system. They wouldn't want to disrupt it. They would be one of the biggest whales of all time. Why would they do anything to damage Bitcoin if somehow they brute force a cryptograph? I mean, it's so ridiculously unlikely, impossible, on the border of impossible. But even still,
I haven't read into that theory enough, but it just occurred to me that whoever is going through the trouble of doing this would realize that about Satoshi's bounty as well. So they'd probably go for someone else's legacy address down the line. So I'm sure people are watching like, well, the whole blockchain, but
oh yeah, I mean, the chain analysis stuff is really wild.
Yeah,
I do think that that's a really interesting point about when you were just talking about the fungibility or the lack thereof. Yeah, they're UTXOs are not 100% fungible, and yes, there are really clever ways to whirl things and do some stuff and sort of create political fungibility. But in terms of like cryptographic fungibility, it's literally just not. And I think a lot of that is a not really understood thing. Like when you spend a UTXO, you spend the entirety of the UTXO. And if you forget to put in a change address to your transaction, you are making a very large donation to whichever miner was lucky enough to mine that transaction. Like it's literally like spending $100 bill and then not asking for the change. So there is a lot of stuff with the privacy and the fungibility of Bitcoin that I think politically will be very interesting. But I think you should always aim for non-KYC, and I think that that's great. But I also think that a lot of the chain analysis stuff is, maybe this is naive of me, but I actually think Bitcoin is eternal and is going to last a lot longer than a lot of these things. So yeah, it may stink that you have some know your customer Bitcoin right now, but we'll give it to someone to hold on to it for 150 years, and let's see if the IRS is still around.
So an interesting point about that. So the time dilation, even between like me on the ground and let's pretend like you're in a plane trying to make a transaction on a centralized ledger, is such that they would get out of order, which is like part of why it takes so fucking long for your bank settlements to like occur. Is because So how far can like a decentralized network solve for these, right? I mean, I would think it could go in perpetuity, but I'm not like a physicist or a mathematician. Like, is 10-minute block time a good block time, interplanetary transactions like notwithstanding, or what happens when we move?
That's a really interesting question. And again, I think it does bring up political stuff. What do we decide? But again, another unbelievable wrinkle to the fundamentals of Bitcoin is actually really what it is. It's probably more aptly, called a time chain rather than a blockchain. I'm sure people have heard that. But one of the, the real innovation and proof of work is that it is a decentralized timestamp server that orders transactions based on this new standard, and it doesn't rely on a centralized clock. So these issues of how do you prevent a digital double spend, that's the most important thing in securing digital scarcity, is that you can't spend that. It doesn't matter if there's only 21 million of them if you can spend it 8 times without losing it out of your wallet. Digital scarcity is useless without preventing a digital double spend. So you have to be able to order transactions and know that if one transaction if someone spent a UTXO, they can't then spend that same UTXO. So the Nakamoto consensus is a decentralized timestamp server that orders all of the transactions without relying on a centralized clock at all. Now, there is an element of standardization in Bitcoin using like CPU speed to make the difficulty adjustment. So there is like a second involved in that estimation for that algorithm. But in terms of like when a block is won, or, the validation of any of that, it completely does not use a clock at all. It's 2 to the 256. Did you hit a bullseye or not? Did you solve the Sudoku to win the block, blah, blah. So Bitcoin actually, because of that, because it's a decentralized standard of time, doesn't rely on a minute or centralized clock or anything like that. It actually can scale, whereas a POS system that utilizes a reliance on a centralized clock actually could not scale. The latency issues of a network where the only thing ordering transactions is a validator that gets chosen by a lottery, and then they order the transactions at, this millisecond, that crap is toast, and it can't scale intergalactically as far as I'm concerned. And
no, it's computationally intractable to
totally. Yes. And also just let's just be honest, POS systems innately centralized to whatever entity was the centralized force that starts it. Compounding interest works in that way. They get more tokens because they have more tokens, so they get 7% a year. Then they get consensus weight, and now we're central banking all over again. And I thought this was a revolution. What are we doing? So in terms of latency network issues of intergalactic scaling on Bitcoin, it's going to be really fascinating. I'm not 100% sure how we will do it, but Nakamoto consensus, because it doesn't allow or doesn't necessitate synchronicity to a centralized clock, it actually does have an ability to settle, I think, in different time zones in a way that we actually could scale it. Again, I'm not really sure. I don't know how things are going to play out, what sort of bandwidth we're going to have. But yeah, I do think a smaller the block for fee version, for fee reasons, creating the fee market, noticing the mempool going down, bits, sats per bit going down. That's an important economic market within Bitcoin, is paying for ledger space, contextually, and super important. You open your Lightning channels on, a low day when the mempool's cleared, and you can open a channel for like a couple sats. That sort of pendulum needs to happen for Bitcoin to last beyond supply issuance. But yeah, how do we scale intergalactically with it? It's going to be really fascinating. Obviously, Lightning is incredible. And it really pisses me off when I see people make these asinine comparisons of what a Bitcoin transaction costs when they just literally don't understand how it works. Your cash is, or your credit card thing is payment is not settling. It's not instant settlement. It's not a bearer asset. That's a remittance payment that is instantly settling. It is an IOU. So we can use cryptographically secure IOUs with Lightning that could scale infinitely on top of one Bitcoin transaction. So any of these metrics of what a Bitcoin transaction costs are just not to be taken seriously in regards to where we're going, which is this second layer on top for day-to-day scaling. And we're seeing it at such an unbelievable rate. I mean, watching the Lightning Network number go up is just like, that's one of the most important charts. And I love that. There's a great Elizabeth Stark quote about that, where she's like, number of people go up. That's the thing I care about. Now we're over, 3,000 Bitcoins, in liquidity on the Lightning Network. I mean, that's humongous. I mean, you don't need to do a 3,000 Bitcoin transaction on Lightning. You should use the main chain for something like that. Maybe you could consider that naive too, but I would want, the confirmations and everything of a main chain settlement for anything that humongous of a deal. But for day to day, when you're buying coffees and doing retail payments, it's like, I mean, cryptographically auditable, pertinent scalability is the key. Who cares that your crap coin can do X, UTXOs per second if none of the fundamentals of the base layer make your protocol worth anything? You're scaling crap, and who cares?
We're almost at 100,000 nodes, 100,000 Lightning nodes. I mean, we might be there. That's known nodes.
Maybe,
I don't know.
it's moving so fast. Maybe by the time this posts, we'll be at like 110,000
Yeah.
or something. But no, it's really fast. It's incredible to see, and you see, all of these varying levels of user knowledge necessitating protocols like you're seeing people have access to running their own Bitcoin nodes that don't know how to use the command line. And obviously, you could have some arguments about whether that's custodial or open source or whatever, but the fact that people are getting access to that, what that means
Yeah.
from a decentralization standpoint. I mean, I think Bitcoin is people like to debate, is decentralization a spectrum? Is it binary? I kind of think it's binary, which is ironic because it's expressed over a spectrum, but you're either decentralized or you're not. And when was the day that Bitcoin became decentralized? That's a great question. I don't know. What block was it? I might say it was block 210,000 because it was the first halvening. And that was the first time that the nodes enforced the halvening on the miners. That's a really interesting thing that I think people should think about, especially Jamie should think about. If Bitcoin was ever going to change its protocol, the miners would just do whatever the hell they wanted, right? No, they have to use the consensus that the nodes are enforcing. And in many ways, the nodes are the most important users on the Bitcoin network because they enforce consensus. Miners,
Yeah. And they enforce your rights.
Yeah.
And you enforce your rights. And no one's taking them away from you, even if you don't want to. If you don't want to do Taproot, don't do it.
Right. And that's a huge, the backwards compatibility of it. I'm sure most people have read Block Size War. It's a super fascinating book on the politics around it. And I think there's so much to learn about those moments where those decisions were made in an open protocol sense, and how, people that did have huge shares of Bitcoin, market share are now, a lot of them don't have as big as shares because they made political moves and social moves and they did stuff. It is a decentralized distributive system. That at its core, fundamentally, it is the apex predator of being the soundest money possible. That's what it's doing. It's going to continue to do that in whatever form that means, whatever that means. And one of the most important ways that is expressed is nodes enforcing consensus. So, I'm super excited to see how the political sphere wraps around this protocol. And I do think that we will see some, more pushbacks than we have with some nation states. And I think that we will see more acceptance than we've seen from others. But it's going to be really fascinating to hear when it does come time to have one of those discussions of like, okay, well, Satoshi said we could raise the block size if we needed to. Is it time that we need to do that? Do we actually need to do that? Do we need to scale? SegWit was a block size increase. It was, it was a fancy one and they kind of hit it in there. But it did literally extend the block. So, where we go from there, what is Bitcoin consensus now? Like, are we too big to make radical changes, or are we actually now, because of the observational, pulling effect, open networks attract smart people. Because of that effect, are we now the best equipped to deal with how to have a change? Because we can all see it. Like, Taproot was a big success in many ways in terms of getting consensus really quickly, much easier than, what we had to do with the user activated soft fork and all that with the block size war. So I'm really
my question for you would be, do you think Bitcoin needs to change? I don't know if there are a lot of people in this camp, but I'm always very nervous about anything introduced because you can only defend for bugs that you can imagine. So
yeah, totally. I think the Bitcoin really doesn't need to do anything to win. I think, I might argue once the first halvening was enforced and we kind of locked into the disinflationary model. And once that went off without a hitch in a decentralized way, so around 2012, maybe the Mayans were right. Maybe the world did end in 2012 and it was the Bitcoin halvening. and we locked into the new era of but I don't think it needs to change. I think it could change, and I think it is strong enough, and the social constructs around it are strong enough that it can handle change. But I don't really see what it really needs to at this point. I think scalability has really been addressed with secondary layer solutions. I think Lightning is severely underestimated. There's so many cool things that are going to happen on it. I think people were surprised by the API and the Twitter launch, but I think we're going to see stuff like that happen so much faster. I mean,
amazing.
We're a tweet away from six figures. I think that. And again, price is really just a metric of a lot of.
What do you mean a tweet away? Just a tweet as a unit of time, or what do you mean?
Yeah, well, maybe, but more like like one of the right people away from accepting a website being or I mean. And again, I'm being a little cheeky. I don't think one person has the ability to move a market that much. I'm not trying to, but I mean, there are entities out there that their network effects are so large that, I mean, Twitter adding Lightning as a economic protocol on top of their, it's a very decentral, obviously there's central points of content censorship, which is interesting. But it's a pretty decentralized. I mean, you can jump on and start a Twitter account in Japan, and then have one in America, and they can, interoperate and do a bunch of stuff. And now putting a network on top of it that you can plug in your localized net, yada yada. Enough people have talked about it, but that's a really big deal. And how many more of these networks are going to jump on? And I think,
all of them.
The idea of getting, I was talking to someone at the Texas Blockchain Summit, and I was saying it's like, El Salvador is getting, they're a $7 million company, and they're 7 million population country. I'm so used to referring to the U.S. as a company that I did the same thing. There's so many. They're getting free. They're getting an open source monetary network that's getting worked on by the brightest and smartest people around the world that are working on it open source, and they're getting all the benefits from that. Other countries are going to see that and jump on, but definitely other technologies are going to jump on. And I think we'll see a lot of networks, if it's literally a zero cost, or maybe, a 5 basis point adjustment versus these payment processors that are like 4.5%, 5%. And we're going to see more of that. Payment processing is probably going to they're going to try to go up if interest rates aren't going to go up, and they're not going to be able to, because now we have this new technology that can reduces the cost of near instant settlement for near zero cost. It's a humongous deal, and it's going to.
And that cost, part of that cost isn't really. It's all transparent. Like, there's not this illusion of commission free, right? How many sats per byte you have to pay to like route these payments.
Totally.
And also you and I can become payment processors.
Yeah.
Right now it's open season. And even if it was illegal, I know a lot of people would do it anyway.
100%. I mean, First Amendment, baby.
Yeah. But that's so underestimated. Like, we can really, like, the people who are learning to use Lightning now are going to be indispensable in the future. Like, especially when finally, like, the prisoner dilemma dynamics of the nation states and corporate entities adopting Bitcoin, when that prisoner's dilemma starts to play out, which it's already been initiated, so there's no avoiding it. It's like, you're going to see like drastic changes in the world economy, if there is such a thing, and if something like that can be understood. You know what I mean? You're going to see like asymmetric, like table turning, like of power too.
I think we're already, I think we're well already into that. I think we're about a year and a half into it. I really do think fundamentally the world changed in March 2020, and John Cornyn was talking at the blockchain summit, and he literally said semiconductors are the new oil, and they were talking about, the military movements that's going on. Taiwan produces over 90% of our like sub 10 nanometer microchips that go in semiconductors, that go in everything.
Mm-hmm.
All these supply chain issues are, so much of it has to do just directly with semiconductors and how we're making them, and what's the industry that is the new industry that is changing energy remittance markets, changing oil's role in the economy. It's Bitcoin. How is that changing? You can't print semiconductors. You can print money, but you can't just, Jay Powell can't hit Control P on his computer and have semiconductors come out. They have to invest in the these chip manufacturers. They need to protect these things politically. So we're going to see these new game theory models play out. The game theory model is no longer, we need to occupy the Middle East to uphold the petrodollar. And now, oh, wow, what was that? Oh, wow, we just suddenly overnight left Afghanistan, like just very suddenly. That was kind of strange. That goes against everything that I've literally lived under my entire life. Why? Why is that happening? Why are we seeing these fundamental things? Why is oil going negative?
Mm-hmm.
I think oil is going to go up. Of course, everything will go up, and that's priced in dollars. But
importantly, why are they making the whole population lame and locking them in their house and restricting? I mean, not even like, if you want to say humans have rights, like not even just their rights, but literally their ability to move around physically. Like, why are we shutting whole economies down and just like pulling the wool over the eyes of the whole world?
I mean, yeah, man, it gets so deep there. You couldn't, if you wanted to do a controlled demolition of the American purchasing economy, and you were going to write out a script of exactly how you would do it. And this is not me like spouting out conspiracy. I just mean, if you were going to do it, how would you do it? If that was your job, you would do something exceptionally similar to what has been done. I mean, this plane is crashing, no survivors, middle class is done. Whereas, we got Fed officials coming out being like, oh, I got to quit now because of ethics stuff. I'm forced to sell all my bonds at the literal top because of ethics. We got insider, you can look at the receipts of these people, and they're making, godly amounts of money. The wealth divide is growing, insanely from this scenario. Money printing always hurts the people that have the least amount of money the most, which is ironic because you think that that's not true, but it is. And so the people that got hurt by these bailouts, again, when you can kind of look at it in an electrical way, when you have this load in the system that is, inefficiently pulling from, a really good generator or whatever, you're gonna have these snafus, and money printing is one of the best ways to have like a, an uneven load and unequal load.
So who's leading this dance? Is it, a bunch of like economists and like world planner, like the World Economic Forum, or like an economy that operates kind of like outside of human desire, or that's operating under like our collective will? You know what I'm saying? Like no single person knows how like a pen or a pencil is made. Like right. These systems only arise out of capitalism, and they're very hard to tear down once they do. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but I think it's weird to me to think that there are people that understand it, like even a fraction of what is going on.
No, I totally agree. I think that there definitely are people that are able to take a step back and see things. I do think that exists. I think that most of them are Bitcoiners, and that's a very underspoken symptom of Bitcoinization, is like a bunch of really brilliant people coming together because they're like, oh, you see all this shit too? Oh, cool. I'm gonna listen to what else you have to say about everything else. But I do think that there's a lot of really meaty, juicy content in what you're saying there, and I love getting into the trenches and all the
conspiracy
of what it could be, because
yeah
it makes more sense to me than what I see when I turn on the television, you know?
yeah
So I'm all for playing in that world, you know, in a healthy way, of course. But I think money has a mind of its own and a physics system of its own that does stuff. And we are victims or you know, participants in the system, depending on how you want to look at it. And therefore we do certain things because of that. And I think a lot more of it is less you know, directly malicious and more just the biology of I want to make as much money as possible because that's the world that's what I was told to do. And I do think that there are like deep biological programming that's causing people to do these like really, you know, sociopathic, selfish economic things. But like, I mean, it's easy to pick an entity or a person. And I think, you know, the World Economic Forum deserves a lot of crap for like, you know, predicting all of the stuff we're going through before it happened. And it's, you know, sort of, you know, expressing the needs for how we're going to deal with problems before they even happened. I think that should be suspect to a degree. But do I think that, you know, I don't know. Maybe I get off at a stop before a lot of people do on the train of going down that, you know, that I just don't even want to necessarily think about the evil being personified or this.
Well, there's like very little evidence that these people are competent. Like I don't think that they're leading the world down this you know path on purpose.
That's another huge part too, is I really think that there's a lot of just like status quo perpetuating, which is, I think, an act of maliciousness because the status quo is horrible, but it's not for them. I mean, they're just doing what they know. These people that were born with tons of money, you know, power, you know, sort of innately is a corrupting agent, maybe more so. Money flow is a corrupting agent. And especially when you're dealing with a unit of account that doesn't hold itself, you know, these people are not trying to be paper rich. They're trying to be a much more deeper level, a nuanced version, a much more like, you know, there are things beyond being rich. You know, there's control, there's power, there's so many other things beyond just dollars in an account, when dollars in an account don't really ultimately mean that much. It's much more important to, you know, own this building or own this brand or be, you know, this close to the money printer, or be able to do direct legislation, or to like take money from the people you're supposed to be regulating, and then you need a waiver, an ethics waiver, to be able to brief the president. You know, stuff like that. That's just, I think there's two things at play. There's status quo perpetuating, which can happen ignorantly or maliciously, and then there is just like criminal activity. You know,
Yeah.
There's just literal crime and
bad intentions.
Yeah, you know, again, I'm gonna keep dunking on Jamie Dimon because
he deserves it. Yeah.
Like, oh, what happened to that boat that got seized that was filled with cocaine that you owned? What about that $1 billion, the biggest, you know, spoofing metals? You were spoofing metal markets and got caught. You made billions of dollars and you paid $1 billion fine. That's just part of your business model, you know, financial penalty for these people that are beyond money, you know, rich. Like, they don't care. That's part of their, he made, say they made $4 billion spoofing the metal markets. Oh, who cares if it was the biggest fine of all time? If it was not even 25% of what they made off of that spoof, that's not much of a penalty. No one went to jail for 2008. I mean, I think they put some patsy in there for like a second, but no one got in trouble for that. Like, Mnuchin should have been arrested for the way he profiteered with SunWest, and instead, you know, Kamala Harris, as the DA of California at the time, decided not to press charges, and then, you know, 10 years later, he's under Trump as the Treasury printing shit away. So, I mean, there's a mutually assured profits aspect of the cabal or whatever, of this money making regime. But I think more of it is just sort of status quo perpetuation and just money having its own physics. it flows to things. It flows to deflationary things. It likes to make more of itself. So when we're in an unhinged financial system, you're going to see unhinged plays because that's a nature of a broken system. You have to do broken stuff.
Yeah, and that is something that's been replicated across all societies that are about to enter, if they have not already entered, hyperinflation. It's like rampant gambling, war, just well, there's always war, but just all these kind of like vices and like just like bring people and whole societies to their knees right before not the end, but like something new will emerge, and whether it'll be Bitcoin or like, I mean, it will be for me, but I don't know what the nation's going to take on to pull us out of this. I would assume they're going to try to roll out a central bank digital currency, because it seems like they're not willing to admit, as we must all admit, that we didn't know anything about money. And you know, in order to embrace Bitcoin, you have to say that to yourself. And I don't think the U.S. government's capable of saying that.
So I think that is true for the majority of the figureheads of the U.S. government. I think that is true, and we're seeing that in written policy. We're seeing it in the way they talk about policy. It's like, wow, you really fundamentally don't understand. Like, you think it's ridiculous that if we raise taxes on an employer, that those costs would get passed on to the consumer? Like, you're confused by that? Like, how is that confusing? That's just, if you raise the cost of running a business, those costs are going to go to the consumers. That's how that works. They're not going to take it out of their profits. You know, maybe it'll be a little bit shared, but come on, that naivete is so insincere. But I also think it's naive to not, again, I kind of talked about this in the article. I think it's a bit naive to not consider that the U.S., you know, financial governance, you know, part of the system, which is one of, if not the most important part, is fully aware of what's happening, and it's in their best interest 100% for hyper Bitcoinization to happen, you know. And that was a bit about what the sort of the argument, if there was one, in my article, was that, you know, who's actually really the best off to take advantage of a hyperinflationary scenario of the US dollar. It's us. It's the people that control the money printer of the world reserve currency. If everyone else is already unhinged, everyone else is going negative interest rates or zero. We got Japan buying up 100% of its GDP. We're starting to see some really unhinged stuff across, you know, central banks across the world. We very well may be fully aware of what's going on. We may be fully aware of what Bitcoin is doing, and it might be in our best interest to allow this to happen in this exact way, in this sort of controlled economic demolition way, to allow the scenario for hyper Bitcoinization to happen at the benefit of the U.S. purchasing economy. And right now, that was what would happen. If Bitcoin went to $10 million tomorrow, the greatest economy that would get the most out of that would be the U.S. economy. So again, you know, I'm not trying to say that I think that there was a meeting of people where they, you know, thought of Bitcoin and it's you know, that Satoshi is an American Central Intelligence Agency operative. Yeah. I'm not necessarily saying that, but again, money has a physics of its own. Money does its own thing. What would be in the best interest of the American dollar as a system as a whole? If we inflate into something that can counter the supply and demand fulcrum that's normally happens when a reserve currency hegemony, you know, switches, you know, right now we should be switching our purchasing power to China, you know, to India. There are debtors that we owe that they should be taking over. You know, they probably should have taken over in 2008, but we did a really clever thing and we kind of kicked the can down the road, and boom. Then, you know, Halloween 2008, Bitcoin white paper gets announced, you know, and then we launched in 2009. It's like it was directly made as a direct response to the euro dollar squeeze and to the Great Recession, or whatever they call it. Was it a direct relation from economics and U.S. You know, engineering? Maybe. Or was it really created by a cyberpunk, which obviously that's what I would much prefer it to be, But ultimately, I don't think it really matters. What matters is the math, and the algorithms are the algorithms. And here we are, and we have a $120 trillion bond market that's melting. At, now what acknowledged inflation is like 6% a year or something, 5.4%, something. I think they just announced it yesterday. That's a big ice cube that's melting. It's got to go somewhere. Where would you put it if not? When you're trying to avoid these issues of economic inflation, why would you put it into anything that's not scarce when there is a scarce option that's never existed?
And that option has zero maintenance costs outside of the cost that often others, for example, you don't mind Bitcoin, do you?
I don't. I have a node, but I don't mind. No, not yet.
Yeah, I don't mind either. So we're not expending that power to protect the network, right? And I would add that that's a very worthwhile thing to expend power on.
Totally.
But what I'm saying is, this is not a boat where if you don't pay the maintenance costs on the boat sinks.
Right.
This is property that you can take with you anywhere, send it between any two people, and as long as you can protect one piece of information, it remains yours.
And also, I think that's a point for just the strength of this thesis and how really indestructible Bitcoin is. It's like people don't really, I think, understand that. Yes, you need the internet. Yes, Bitcoin uses in internet protocols to propagate and flood transactions and yada yada. But the network you could lose your internet in your house for a week, and an EMP could go off in your region. And as long as you have your code of your seed phrases written down on a piece of paper on a notebook that you got closed, that you hide under your bed or whatever, it doesn't matter if the internet goes down or the power goes out. You can wait those 3 weeks, and when the network comes back on, your stuff is good. You're so thermodynamically, cryptographically, auditably secure within literally holding a 12 seed phrase word in your head, or writing it down on a piece of paper, or doing, cold storage in the very literal sense, putting it into a plate, or however, people protect their entropy of their random number generation for their keys. Great. But you don't need to be connected to the internet to be securing your asset. And I think a lot of people really don't understand that in a general.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. You don't connected to do a lot of stuff with it, but I mean,
you don't even need it initially. Yeah, to broadcast transactions, you don't even need it. And from like a first level, like I can send it off on a mesh network. I can send it,
Or you could take that open dime behind you and put some on and walk into a bar and hand someone $50 worth of Bitcoin on an open dime.
Yeah, there you go.
Sure, of course it is. I could also tell you that I have X amount in a wallet, and then literally say, I could sit next to you on a bus station in a film noir movie and tell you 12 words, and you write them down on your stick of gum, and you walk out, and now you got my wallet. There's so many ways to
many ways to transact. Yeah.
And obviously, I think again the no one would care about the fundamentals of an asset that you could just put on a USB stick if it wasn't secured by a network of this decentralized, yada yada, all the things Bitcoin is. It's essential to the fundamentals. But that's where the pertinent scalability comes in, where there are so many ways to scale Bitcoin. It's crazy. You can do so many things. I could tell you my phrase right now, and I would be giving you a Bitcoin transaction. I could open dime. I could write it down. I could, so.
And there will be biological solutions before too long, scan a fingerprint, dude. You know what I mean? Like all kinds of weird
This is the stuff I say where we're a tweet away. It's like you see stuff like, the Amazon Palm or whatever. And it's like you literally use your biometrics of your palm. You can steal my wallet, and you put it over a sensor, and it knows that it's you. It can only be you. It's not something that can be faked based on the math and the lines of your hand, and they can associate a cryptographic proof to that, and you can sign a signature, and you can pay with your hand.
It sounds like a real bad idea.
There's gonna be a secondary market popping up for chopped off hands.
Or just handprints. I mean, you can replicate anything physically for cheap.
Yeah, I know it's the that's where I say I'm excited in an optimistic way to see where the political and social side of this revolution goes, because yeah, we're gonna see weird Blade Runner stuff. I mean, we already are, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
is
Do
a
you,
palm gonna be the new currency? I mean, I don't know. It's gonna be weird.
do you think are you worried about the future, like for Bitcoiners? Because I think there's going to be a shifting point. I'd be interested to see it in our lifetime, but maybe it's like beyond that, where like the resentment's going to be huge. Like you're going to be that 1% that can't walk around a city unprotected,
Well,
because there's going to be millions of people that are not going to be able to afford to get any Bitcoin.
so I
Well, they'll
think
get some, but
right.
not
So
compared to
I
most
think
people.
that's a really interesting thing that again, I'm really curious to see the political where this goes, because when we really hit that the next parabolic part of our ascent here, which I think is imminent, I don't margin trade anymore or anything, but I do, and I don't think it's a good idea. I haven't done it for 3 years, but I am a trader. I learned through trading, and that's one of the ways that I got into it. And I do think we're absolutely going to see some stuff soon. But when we truly hit that, mass parabolic adoption thing, and we see price, percentages of appreciation like the Reichsmark to gold in 1923, and we see these, 51 trillion percent, just insanity, right? I do think that there is going to be a lot of people that are left behind, and it's going to be interesting to see what system comes out of hyper Bitcoinization as a reaction to like not let people die. I mean, it really is that simple. I mean, when we had a lot of these breakdowns and our economy stopped, the America like pays for like over 300 million people every day to eat food. And if our economy collapses, there's going to be 300 million people without food. First off, how did we get to that scenario is mind blowing, that there are that many people that are literally reliant on other food sources. Obviously, that's a symptom of unmitigated growth and
Where does that number come from? Sorry, I wasn't aware of that. Where does that number come from?
I think it's just a metric of how many people that direct contributions from American like philanthropic activity, like what we pay for.
Yeah.
I actually think it's higher than that. I went down. I think it's actually closer to 400 million, but I think I can pretty safely say it's over 300 million people that the U.S. is responsible for feeding every day. And
Wow.
there's huge humanitarian crises that could occur if we have a complete debasement of monetary, stability in the developed world, but affecting the developing world or whatever. Which is, again, those are kind of stupid phrases, but I do think we're going to have to see some systems come into place to sort of deal with those issues, because Bitcoin is scarce and people aren't going to give it up. That said, the congregation of wealth in Bitcoin is different than the congregation of wealth in a proof of stake system or central banking or even a gold standard, although more akin to a gold standard, is that there's a distributive factor that needs to happen. So when you own Bitcoin, if you want to make money off of that Bitcoin or buy a service or, purchase something or hire someone, you need to pay them in Bitcoin. And over time, that payment will get more and more and more and more expensive instead of cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So instead of people in power getting more and more and more and more and more power for less and less and less and less and less amount of money, you're going to see the opposite, where if you're the first employee at a Bitcoin startup and they're paying you, say many years ago, and they're paying you a Bitcoin a day, now you can go start your own company. Now, 5 years later, 6 years later, 9 years later, you're worth more than the company, or as much, because of your unit of account appreciating and it being this scarce distributed thing. So I'm a lot less worried about, first off, I think Michael Saylor's great, but I'm not worried about Michael Saylor's like aggregate of power, because if he wants to buy things or do things, he has to pay people with it. And so there's naturally going to be a distributive function downward from aggregates of power. Yes, he will have more and more fiat per Bitcoin, but every time he buys something, he needs to do it in Bitcoin. And I know he says he'll never sell and yada yada, and everyone says that, but I'm gonna sell some Bitcoin at some point to get a property or to do a thing. I've sold Bitcoin only like 3 times, in any real
Really?
significant. And
Yeah.
one was to buy a tape echo for my studio. Another was to go on a trip, which again, I don't think you should do that generally, but this was sort of a family thing, and it was really special and worth it. And it was a very small amount of Bitcoin. And then I bought some time for myself to like make a record and to live for a little bit. And so I do think that there
Oh
are
yeah.
needs to an end that are worth more than your money. But again, the tape echo that I bought 3 years ago with Bitcoin is now the most expensive thing I've ever bought.
Yeah.
Literally, I mean, it just is like it's worth in Bitcoin worth more than what my car is that I bought. So
I'm
that
considering selling my car right now for
yeah,
Bitcoin. I've been thinking it's once I thought of it, I couldn't unthink it. Now every time I see my car, I'm like,
couldn't it be? I
yeah,
know.
that could be a lot of money.
I need it for. I did some clever things when I got my car. Like I took out a ridiculous loan and knew that I would buy myself more time to buy, and I ended up it totally worked. And I ended up
Nice.
a car for much cheaper than I would have had I just sold the Bitcoin, right? But I do think that forcing function of it being a scarce, distributing necessary, not just I can keep $100 million in a bank account and pay for all my expenses with an interest rate. The fact that that doesn't exist means that everyone you pay gets richer and richer for every service they do for you. Every service you buy gets more and more expensive. So once that effect really comes to the market in a really full way and everyone is using it for their unit of account, right? We're going to see really profound effects on society and day-to-day living because people will have to work less. Like we're in such a deflationary world in terms of technology. Why don't we see any of the profits? Why is our wealth divide getting more and more intense with deflation? We should be working less and making more money. Everything should be cheaper. Why are things going up? It doesn't make sense. Part of the system is broken here. So by fixing the system, of unit of account, of a digitally scarce disinflationary model, we're going to change the world at a very fundamental level at an individual sense. I really like to think at the protocol is what is it incentivizing, not what is it, what is the economic incentives of your model. And Bitcoin has so many little markets in it: the fee markets, ledger space markets, energy markets, human capital markets. What is the cost of a trustless, third party, peer-to-peer transaction? What does that cost? Like there's so many little things within it. But really fundamentally, I mean, it's going to change our relationship with money and time and energy and space. It's going to do really, I mean, it is doing stuff. I mean, I'm seeing it in my life has changed significantly, the way I look at things, the way I price things. I hate spending money, even though I actually probably am more financially secure than I've ever been in my entire life. That came from me not spending money on things for years and being really frugal and, continuing to be that because I understand what the power of a deflationary currency is.
And you understand the kegger of Bitcoin.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And, yeah, I hope more people get on it. That's the thing. It's like it only helps me to educate people, to bring them in, to empower the network and decentralize the network more and broadcast information and get education up. It only helps me. It's the most selfish thing I can do is dedicate all my time to teaching people about Bitcoin, right? Which is ironic because it's seemingly I do it for free or whatever. It's like it's seemingly a selfless act, but actually in the game theory of it, I want more people to know about much about Bitcoin as possible so that they are doing and making the same game theory choices that I am. There's that game theory concept of Nash equilibrium where when you're at that stasis where every single person best thing that they can do is the same choices, the same game to be played is what's best for everyone, which is, stay humble, stack sats, and, secure the network. Don't be a bad actor. Don't try to, propagate false transactions with UTXOs you don't own or mine crappy blocks or whatever. You are going to be disincentivized by the model by trying to do your own fork or trying to do some malicious crap, you are going to lose money. And so the economic protocol incentivizes like sound, good people, interacting with this open network. So I kind of think that's why I'm so secure and bullish, is that it's like, I just don't see how that game theory would break, where I personally would ever not want to be a Bitcoin fundamentalist sort of disciple. So why would it break for anyone else? Maybe eventually I'll be less interested on it on a day-to-day level. Maybe, I guess, when it's just money and it's not this fun new thing, but
I think until the full like societal implications of it are realized, which is like never, like we'll always be interested in it.
yeah, I
There's
do.
so many unknowns.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you
But
think that you said something that I don't often hear, but that I really like Bitcoin is the Nash equilibrium of sound money. Do you think John Nash had anything to do with Bitcoin? The timeline's a little weird, but someone either who was directly or indirectly like very influenced by him made Bitcoin like 100%.
Well, I don't know enough to say on that directly, but
Mm-hmm.
I have a general sense of how like knowledge works in a communal sense. And I think when people are thinking about certain things, it doesn't even matter if you're connected to them. Like there were some weird studies done where like they released a crossword puzzle on the East Coast, and they had like, a few hundred people solve it, and it took them a really long time. And then a week later, they did the same crossword on the West Coast, with these people now in the West Coast control group having no contact, never seen the East Coast answers or anything like that, but they solved the puzzle at like twice the speed of the people that occurred it, that were dealing with it for the first time on a communal sense. So I do think that there are some very interesting ways that information passes, not necessarily in like a new age collective consciousness way, but also that. But I just think the way that information moves around.
I think we're in a closed simulation.
I think I think if you're not considering that, you're also naive. But I can't say personally if they, the game theory, community, or like the Internet Bill of Rights community, or any of those communities were directly involved with like the Satoshi project or Satoshi himself or whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't know anything about it, but I would be surprised if those ideas weren't at least kicked around or thought of in some of those rooms.
Yeah, it's too, I have to catch up to that history. Like I came to Bitcoin way later. It's too early. I just don't know enough. So I just wondering.
I don't really know a ton either. Game theory, I think, is
it's all that MIT bubble where all these crazy ideas come out of.
Yeah, I know. And that's, I think, now we got, I took, not at MIT, I just did it online, but I took our new SEC chair, Gary Gensler's class.
Did you really?
On crypto. Yeah, just online.
It's available. I've seen it.
And I mean, he knows what's going on. Like he made some jokes about like Nakamoto-san, and he had some really cheeky comment in front of one of the speeches he'd done recently, where he was like, if anyone out there knows who Satoshi is, like send us an email, just kind of playing about it. And it's like, he's another one of these MIT world people. And it's like, he has a really strong, like, he knows that Nakamoto's consensus is different than the other ones. And whether or not he's going to execute that with extreme regulation, and whether or not we're going to see these, what should be securities, be treated as such, whether or not that happens or not, I think the acknowledgement from the financial sector in a very, significant way understands what makes Bitcoin different, what makes Nakamoto's innovate. To quote him, Nakamoto's innovation is something real. I think you don't get to that standpoint unless you really have done the homework on the game theory and the micro and macro.
Yeah, I watched just the first couple classes of his that are available online. I have to cover him like pretty often for Bitcoin Magazine, and I think the jury's still out on this guy as to whether he's like going to be a net positive or negative for Bitcoin. In the way that, like, I don't think anyone is like good or bad for Bitcoin. Absolutely, their actions at a particular time kind of either align with Bitcoin or they don't. Like this is like an idea I'm trying on from my friend Pete Rizzo. So like there are no Bitcoiners, right?
Pete
Yeah.
Rizzo, genius for sure.
Yeah, he's a fucking genius. Yeah, so you're either like, and Ian, who knows where he got it? I think he got it from another old Bitcoiner. But anyway, on in terms of Gary Gensler, it'll just be interesting to see because he knows more than he tells. Like he's playing almost as an advocate for Bitcoin by withholding like information about it that he knows would overwhelm legislation. Like if you put any Bitcoiner in there to do the job that he's doing, they would lose all respect because they just wouldn't be able to shut the fuck up about Bitcoin. You know what I mean?
Totally. And that's where I kind of think I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt here based on just he knows too much about it to be stupid about it. And he's worked in government before. I mean, I don't think this is even his first time in this position. I think he certainly was involved in the end of the Clinton administration. I'm pretty sure he's been high roles in the government before for sure. And then went to education and worked on, with MIT and started the crypto course, basically the I forget what he called it, but blockchain something or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But he knows too much about the fundamentals of how it works, I think, for him to not equip, because I mean, ultimately he has some things to take care of, and he has some responsibilities for his job. And I think he just knows too much about the Nakamoto consensus and the difference between it and all of the other attempts.
Securities, illegal, unregulated securities.
Pre-mined illegal securities. Like, I don't care how outdated that law is or whatever. It's pretty black and white, and these things are securities. Now, whether or not they're gonna, enforce them like they are, I don't know. But I really think that there's a fundamental understanding that you can't ban Bitcoin. You can't block it. There are things you could muck up some of the on and off ramps in a centralized way. You could muck it up a little bit or make it difficult. But I think there's enough fundamental understanding at the SEC. I think they're doing, more misdirection than anything.
That's a good way to put it.
And I think it's naive to not consider that they know exactly what they're doing. And I mean, he is actually equipped with the knowledge to navigate this turbulent time and do it in a way that, maybe he's trolling us when he says just get a 6% interest rate student checking account and save $5 every day, and then you'll have $100,000 when you're like 9.
Very strange.
It's just like, what are you like? Are you trying to show us that compounding interest is dead and savings accounts are dead? Are you trying to tell us that even if we did save this much, we wouldn't actually have that much money? Because
it's like gotta be ironic. Like it comes across as like a deadbeat like joke,
right? And I think he's too smart, and he is funny, in this MIT way. And again, I'm not trying to shill for him. I don't care. But
right.
Just, I mean, I think to not consider he knows when he's cracking Nakamoto-san jokes and stuff, it's like he knows what's going on. And obviously, Hester Pierce knows what's going on, and she's there with him. So I would not be surprised if some of the theories that were, proposed in the birth of the Bitcoin dollar article are to come to fruition, where, we do sort of have a hyperinflation or an inflationary event into Bitcoin with the US dollar in order to preserve purchasing power. I don't really know what else we would do. I mean, I don't think we do too much to protect our purchasing power historically. We're not just going to let it go. So I wouldn't be surprised, if in a very short period of time or within the next year or so, and I think it's going to happen quick because we need to, but it really legitimately wouldn't surprise me if Gensler came out one day and just said something like so unbelievably ridiculous and like inside, like he tweets like banana bread or something. Like I'm serious. Like I'm pretty sure he's a Bitcoiner. I think that could happen, and I could be totally wrong, and maybe I'm being super naive, and he tries to do a bunch of enforcement stuff. But like, good luck. I think he's smart enough to know that, you're never going to be able to mess with First Amendment in any serious way. I don't care how many whistleblowers are coming out doing whatever. That's not going anywhere. Good luck with that. I think we'll have states secede from the nation before we have First Amendment rights being affected, and that includes financial first rights. So First Amendment is so unbelievably important. I don't see it going anywhere, and I good luck. And I think he understands that they can't mess with it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, where do you see Bitcoin going, like near term? Like, what's the next bullish thing that's happening? What are you looking forward to? What would you like to see happen?
Yeah, I obviously think, from a trader standpoint, I think we're due for some fun fireworks, but that seems to me like such an inevitability. It's so fun when it happens. I love having my friends being really excited, and my friends and loved ones reaching out and being like,
yeah,
I can now do this thing, or like, I'm so thankful that like, that's the stuff that I really care about. And yeah, so I'm really interested in seeing I'm really curious politically. Like, I'm really, really curious, because I think our country's at a really weird spot politically, and we're so divided. There's so much division. And I think seeing, I think Bitcoin is an open network, and ultimately it's like it's a connective tissue. And so I'm really excited to see how it brings people together that you never would suspect would be working together. Like, I mean, again, if you had told me, 8 years ago or something, or less, that I would be like super excited about going to see Ted Cruz talk, and then I hear that he's like, literally knows what he's talking about, and is, it's now I feel like he's an ally, and that's so strange, that it's money for friends and enemies, and now I see, oh wait, he's not my enemy. Like, actually his ideals of freedom are actually much more connected with mine than I thought, even if, obviously we have some disagreements or yada, yada. And again, I'm not shilling for Cruz either, but I'm really curious to see the infrastructures politically and socially that come together. I think we need unity more than ever. I'm really disgusted to see the way that we've been so divided in the last 2 years. Because I don't think humans are divisionary creatures. I think we're like conglomerate creatures. We love being in social, connectivity with each other. We just do it in these really weird isolation ways. Like, we fill these holes with Instagrams and Facebooks, which are just like algorithmically controlled and really messed up. So I'm really excited to see, Bitcoin bringing people together in ways that don't necessarily have to do directly with money, but of course everything does. But I want to see art. I want to see culture. I want to see new technologies for connectivity that are First Amendment positive. Don't allow censorship. I want to see, like, either these old world institutions, these legacy institutions, adopt this open network, or see the new ones that rise in their place from them refusing to adopt the open network. So I'm really curious to see the landscape play out. And the game theory of Bitcoin has been set for a while, and but I'm really curious to see who gets it, who picks up with it. What, all you got to do now to be a politician, basically, if you want instant funding and attention and people to tweet about you, is to say that you like Bitcoin. I mean,
it's so funny. Yeah,
I know so much more about El Salvador than I ever thought I would know, other than I love their pupusas, and I don't mean in a dickish way. I really do. But I know more about them now. I know about their GDP, their remittance, how many of them, their total population. I know their president's name. I know their president's brother's name. It's just, I never would have known any of that stuff if not for, oh, you're into the same thing I'm into.
This falls under just the very act of acknowledging, validating, or getting Bitcoin is good for Bitcoin. And so what a lot of these like celebrities and politicians in whole countries are finding out is you jump on that bandwagon, you have, I don't know, a couple million people who are already on your team,
Yeah,
regardless of who you are, in some capacity or another for some amount of time. Like, we're going to support you.
totally.
Um,
It,
because the alternative is much worse. Even if you're my enemy, like, I would rather that you use Bitcoin than the dollar, so that at least your family and like descendants can
totally.
live in like a decent world, like somewhere down the line.
Opportunity for fairness in an economic open network, which is just, we've never had that.
Yeah.
You and I have never had that in our lifetime. Our parents probably haven't had it. There's a chance maybe our grandparents did, or some of our parents that, maybe are a little bit older that were able to start a business before 1971. Like we haven't experienced, people love to say like down with capitalism and it's like, well, you're not talking about capitalism. You're talking about kleptocracy. You're talking about oligarchy. You're talking
Yeah.
about criminal activities of people that are running a sham of a capitalist society. Like, capitalism is not innately wrong. It's fine to risk capital for gain. Like, that's a biological
I
feature. That's fine.
I repeat this way too often when talking to people, but it's like I don't understand people with like anti-capitalist stickers or just like sentiments at all, because without capitalism, like 90% of what you and I do in a day would be fucking impossible.
It would be impossible without
You'd be,
without
yeah,
markets, without
you'd be living like a rural El Salvadorian,
right.
like hoping to get airdropped like your rations and like some clothes. Like,
Totally. And I do think that there are symptoms of our broken kleptocracy and oligarchy. Like I said, like, okay, 300 million people are reliant on our central bank to feed. Obviously, I think that is a symptom of something wrong. There's unmitigated growth somewhere that is leeching off of something and causing this imbalance. Like, I think that you can hold space for that too, and that be true. There are obviously issues in our expression of whatever system of our broken system of capitalism that we're running, but it's not capitalism's fault. It's not that. That's just a weird virtue signaling thing that people do. Yeah, there's so many obvious things to make fun of there, but just it's really just basic financial misunderstanding, and then total misdirection from legislative bodies being talking about how we need to tax the rich and all this stuff when they're the ones causing wealth inequality through printing and causing quintillionary price inflation effects by their direct legislation, or causing imbalance. Oh yeah, you want to talk about the pharmaceutical companies are ripping everybody off. It's like, well, then why did you mandate billions of dollars to be paid by taxpayers for COVID vaccines or whatever? It's like, don't look at what they're doing, or don't look at what they're saying, look at what they're doing. And I think down with capitalism is a perfect example of, don't look at what they're saying and look at what they're doing. Anyone that's saying that is not being honest with you. If they're selling you a sticker that says down with capitalism, think about it.
yeah, I would say that like the most people, I mean, just anecdotally, I don't have any research about this, but like the most people who are like anti-capitalists are like the last benefactors of capitalism before the next fucking generation that's actually going to have to work and like learn how to maintain capital. Like, it's all fun and games like down with capitalism until you actually have to manage some capital and put it to productive use. Like,
Totally. Yeah. I would say, I'm lucky to have maybe had to come to terms with those, those actions when, starting the companies that I've started or whatever, and at a very micro level. And it's like, okay, how do I want to offer this lofty mission? How do I do it? How do I achieve it with this asset that's depreciating constantly? It's like, I don't want to hold this money in the US dollar. I want to hold it in something that's going to appreciate, So yeah, it's really sad. It really does bum me out, I think, to see so many people rooting for things that are directly going against the betterment of them as an individual. And let's be honest, I mean, the greatest way to achieve what people that's, this idea of socialism. The best way to achieve it is by empowering the individual to such an extreme degree that they're actually able to help the people around them, and they're actually able to be such a sovereign individual that they can help those around them and set up infrastructures to help people. I'm not saying we should just be completely 100% open market, no regulation at all. Obviously, I think we got to transition to some degree here, but the more I look at it, the more I sort of grok the numbers and learn about this stuff, it just seems more and more and more like, no, actually, a lot of these systems that we think are helping people are not. A lot of the people you think that you're voting for to help them don't care about you. I hope that you take responsibility for yourself and your future, and I hope that you store your value and your time in Bitcoin, because where the hell else are you going to store it?
Yeah, and they're like, I don't know, the reciprocity of like education is a little bit sided, like especially in this country. So it's a strange thing, like for real, to be like an evangelist of Bitcoin, but yet we all find ourselves just like sincerely like just trying to tell others. I guess there's like a confirmation bias there, because if you're not someone that's like really vocal about Bitcoin and like even the anonymous people online, like I wouldn't know who you are.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess that brings the question, like how many like quiet, like private sort of Bitcoiners are there that don't want other people to get in?
Probably a lot more than we think, for sure.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is like a fire activating within you sort of proponent of Bitcoin, where you're like, oh my God, I saw the light. I want everyone else to see it too.
Yeah. And that's like that initial number go up instinct is like, oh, can I make the number go up now? Because there was a time in the last 10 years where you could tell your friend to buy some Bitcoin and y'all could raise the price together. That's a real thing.
Yeah, totally. That's really true. Yeah, no, I that's where I really like to lean towards that. Ultimately it is a means to an end. And I think that it attracts people that are interested in, it's a force of love, it's whether it's self-love or future love or community love or just love to have a bunch of cool shit, whatever it is. I think that there's like a positivity to it, where it brings people together that are like-minded in certain ways, but maybe not others. And I mean, I've learned so much about life from learning about Bitcoin, and so much about who I want to be and the type of person I want to be by Bitcoiners and hearing. And that's why I get really upset at a lot of this, just the misinformation and propaganda about it, especially with energy stuff. It just fucking pisses me off, excuse me. But what was I saying? So it really pisses me off that the
misinformation.
But just that it's such a source of good. It's helped me out on such an individual level in such a good way that when I hear ignorant sort of statements about it, you get into almost defense mode about a monetary algorithm. It's kind of strange, but it's not about the algorithm or the protocol. What it is about the things that it allows. That's what I wanted to say. And I think the misinformation about it being, oh, it's a monetary thing, oh, it's funny internet money, it's blah blah blah. It's like, no, it's this destructive, dematerializing force that is destroying these old relics of systemic abuse. And then what is it doing and leaving in its path is this like unbelievable trail of personal empowerment and personal wealth. And
it's the personal rights that you're defending.
Yeah, totally.
It's the first property that, the first form of true ownership. I mean, take out the word true. It's the first form of ownership. Yeah, it's worth defending.
It might be the only thing that you really can own. Like, I don't even know if you can own ideas. you put them out in the world and they're gone and anyone can use them. And but you might actually be able to own Bitcoin. That might be the one bare asset you really can own. You don't own your house. You don't own your property. You don't own your money in the bank. You don't own your stock options. You own, personal relationships. You own your own personal responsibility, and hopefully you own Bitcoin. Pretty much it.